Welcome to the County Conversations podcast, brought to you by the Florida Association of Counties Institute for County Government with support from the University of Florida's IFAS. In this podcast, we dive deep into the diverse and dynamic world of Florida's counties with engaging interviews and thought-provoking conversations surrounding the challenges as well as successes of Florida's counties. Each episode brings you first-hand perspectives from county commissioners, government officials, community leaders, and subject matter experts who are shaping the future of our state. We explore a wide range of topics from economic development and public safety to environmental conservation and emerging technologies. Our aim here is to provide a platform for knowledge sharing, collaboration, and inspiration for county officials and residents alike. Whether you're a county commissioner, government professional, or simply interested in understanding the local government landscape, we hope this podcast provides valuable insights and practical takeaways on all things counties.
And we're live. Eryn, do you want to go ahead and get started? Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can go ahead and get started. And good morning, everyone. Eryn Hurley, Director of Government Affairs at NACo. So just going to be running through kind of the top items that we're tracking here in Washington, D.C. on behalf of counties. So first up, you all may have seen that there were some recent efforts to overturn some additional flexibilities that were granted to counties from the Department of Treasury for the ARPA State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. So remember that State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, that's the $65.1 billion that was authorized under the American Rescue Plan Act and provided the direct funding to every single county, parish, and borough across the country. So what's happened over the last couple of months, Treasury released some additional guidance that provided counties additional flexibility when obligating your ARPA dollars ahead of the December 31st, 2024 deadline. So I won't go through all the flexibilities, but just to name a few, under the new guidance, you're able to cover personnel costs, so like payroll and benefits for certain eligible employees under ARPA guidance. This includes like public health, public safety, human services employees, employees that you hire to maybe track and report for ARPA dollars. You also have the ability to actually reclassify any sort of excess ARPA dollars you have under the December 30 or after the December 31st, 2024 deadline. So that's a huge flexibility as well too. Those are, a couple of just to name those. We were really happy to see that in the guidance. We worked with Treasury really closely to provide that additional flexibility. So what has been happening over the last week, and there was a vote last evening on this, is that the Senate, specifically, there was a group of Senate Republicans that introduced a Congressional Review Act. So that's CRA for short. And pretty much what that would do if it had passed the Senate is that it would repeal the flexibilities that were granted under Treasury's recent guidance around obligation. So that was a huge concern for counties, right? Like you wouldn't have been able to do the whole payroll item. You wouldn't have been able to reclassify your funds. So it really would have limited your ability to do a lot with those ARPA dollars ahead of when you actually have to spend the money in December of 2026. So ultimately, the Senate went into voting last night at around 6 p.m. NACo did a ton of outreach yesterday. We released a joint statement with the National League of Cities as well as the Government Finance Officers Association, asking the senators to oppose the CRA. Luckily, we were able to turn two yeses, Senator Tester from Montana and Senator Sinema from Arizona. They were originally going to vote yes. They voted no, thank God. And so luckily that CRA failed in the Senate. So it was a vote of 49 to 46. So super close vote. Again, luckily they didn't get the 51 votes needed. There were 4 senators that actually decided not to vote. That included Senator Manchin, who we were also trying to flip to a yes. But that's all to say it failed in the Senate. It's not going to go to the House, so that all the flexibilities that you currently have are safeguarded and you can continue moving forward as is. So again, a huge win to counties. Really thankful for everyone that reached out to their senators as well. So again, a huge win there.
So that's super close. I didn't know it was that close.
Yes. Yeah.
And can you talk about so I read that that resolution, and it basically said that the interim obligation final rule
Yeah.
was it had no force in effect. So whenever they do these CRAs, are they like that, or is there a real review by Congress of whatever rule gets passed at an executive agency?
So no, with the CRA, it's really just like a legislative action. There doesn't necessarily have to be like a review of like the actual like what was actually published. It really like the CRA came out because they said that the administration had overreach when when they came out with this guidance around defining what an obligation is. So like when a CRA happens, it only needs 51 votes to pass. It can be forced on the Senate floor for a vote, so long that there's 30 senators backing the CRA. And there's no like sort of like review, right? It's really just like repealing what has been done. This something similar that happened back in the fall is that Congress did another CRA on the Senate side for a lead and copper pipes rule as well too. So that CRA is going to be going into effect in like a month or so. So that's ultimately how like the actual process happens. And we were very, very, very happy to see that it did not pass out of the Senate.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, we were very relieved. I was cheering. I was cheering last night.
Yeah.
So that's one of the items that I wanted to talk about. So again, a huge win there. The next item that I wanted to talk about was the Affordable Connectivity Program. I know I've spoken about this program a couple of times on these calls, but why I wanted to bring it up is because funding for the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP for short, runs out at the end of this month. So the ACP, just as a reminder, that is the program that was authorized under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It was a one-time infusion of funds, right? It provides discounted internet to low-income households. And right now it's currently serving 23 million households. Because it was a one-time authorization, one-time funding, the money, as I mentioned, is about to be depleted by the end of this month. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, they already actually decreased the benefit for the households this month from $30 to $14. That way that they were able to keep all 23 million households under the ACP and not have to kick any households off. But obviously they had to reduce the benefit to make sure that they could cover all the households. So end of this month, the money's completely gone. Because the money has been gone, there have been a number of bipartisan efforts. There's the ACP Extension Act of 2024 that's been introduced, huge bipartisan support, over like 220 bipartisan co-sponsors for that bill between the House and the Senate. The reason why it hasn't, passed is because of the price tag associated with it, which is around $7 billion. The most recent efforts were trying to attach an ACP extension and ACP funding to the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA reauthorization bill. That failed. But after that, what happened is that Senator Lujan and another bipartisan group of senators introduced a new bill, and it's a compromise bill. It lowers the price tag of how much ACP would be funded, and then also includes programmatic changes to the ACP too. So it wouldn't allow for the $100 like stipend to buy an electronic for the household, so that would be taken away. It increases the median household income that a family would have to have in order to be eligible for the ACP. And then it also requires the FCC to implement anti-fraud kind of measures to make sure that, people are eligible for the program. And a couple of other items too. So again, because of the programmatic changes and because of the reduced funding, but still a considerable amount of funding, $6 billion, that was seen as a compromise bill. So that group of senators, they have said, we're going to try to do this standalone bill. We have the support that's needed. So ultimately, we're going to see what's going to end up happening there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Actually, it's a two-part question. When you spoke to us last month, you said that Congressman Clark out of New York was trying to get a discharge petition, which would require, I think, 218 or 220 signatures
Yes.
for that.
Yeah,
So,
218. Yeah.
okay, so, and that's the $7 billion one. Where is that?
So that is still just kind of like in the air. Um, Congresswoman Clark, we scheduled a meeting with her this week. The meeting just hasn't happened yet. We scheduled a meeting with Congresswoman Clark to ask, like, hey, are you amenable to these programmatic changes? She's still very supportive of the $6 billion figure, but will this go? We need a companion bill in the House right now, since it's like a whole standalone bill, since the original extension bill that discharge petition, or not discharge, yeah, discharge petition, was about like the original ACP extension bill, right? So that's dead on arrival. We're not going to do that anymore because of the $7 billion figure attached to it. So now what we're trying to do is the renewed efforts around the new ACP extension bill, and hopefully getting like Representative Clark on board on the House side, as well as other bipartisan.
Okay, and so, and this is my second part of the question is, and you're
Yeah.
going to have to just educate me on this because I don't fully understand. So they, last month they passed the two minibuses
Yep.
appropriations bill. So there was 12 of those. How does this fit within that? So they've passed those, they've got a budget that goes until September 30th. And that, funds the government. How does this fit within that? Let's say they did pass this, everyone's happy with it, and it's $6 billion. How does that fit within the existing budget that they passed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So pretty much what it would be, since what would happen is that this would be like another one-time infusion of funds, since it's like standalone right now. And then what they would have to do is that eventually they would have to include it in like the appropriations process, right? So like fiscal year 2025. So since it's like a standalone, it would be a one-time infusion of funds similar to what it was under the bipartisan infrastructure law, but it wouldn't necessarily be part of appropriation cycle, right? So they would have to figure that out their next appropriations bill that they do.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And then I'll move on just because I did mention the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill associated with the Affordable Connectivity Program. So great news yesterday. The House and Senate, specifically the House, ended up passing their federal aviation bill, so in agreement with the Senate. And what it really does kind of as a 1,000-foot overview is that it improves aviation safety, it enhances protections for passengers and airline workers, and then also invests in airport and air travel infrastructure across the country. Ultimately, the House, they ended up voting the package to pass along to President Biden for his signature. It was a vote of 387 to 26, so obviously a lot of support there. In terms of what this really includes is that the bill authorizes more than $105 billion in funding for the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, as well as $738 million for the National Transportation Safety Board. And this funding runs through fiscal year 2024 all the way to fiscal year 2028. One of like the kind of key items that was like a big tension throughout all of these debates is that it added longer distance flights to Reagan National Airport, which is right here, right outside of DC, that many folks were against, but ultimately it did include, there are some additional flights in there as well. But again, as I mentioned, now under this new funding, what airports are going to be able to do is that they can hire more air traffic controllers, which ultimately would help fill. There are currently actually 3,000 vacancies across the country, so be able to fill those gaps. Again, improving runway safety as well. And then in terms of the passenger protections that I mentioned too, this is kind of all around like airline refunds rather than vouchers. So that is a part of it as well too. So a lot of good stuff in there. Again, we were really happy to see that there was a longer term reauthorization finally. We've been operating under a short-term FAA reauthorization since September. There have actually been 4 different short-term reauthorization. So obviously this helps counties with certainty. We know that we're going to get federal funding now for our airports. We know that we'll also get money for air traffic controllers, which if we didn't, we would have had to furlough those folks off. And so really happy to see a consensus on that. And then another item that I wanted to touch on, two more items, Farm Bill, and then I also want to touch on some AI updates too. So Farm Bill updates, you all probably have seen that both the House and Senate have released their separate frameworks for the Farm Bill. We don't have legislative text yet. We know that at least the Senate text is coming out tomorrow, I believe. But, good overall, really great provisions in both of those packages, I will say. With, of course, there's always going to be some concerns, right? No matter what. So I will say for the Farm Bill, for the Senate framework, what's included in there is that there's $500 million in mandatory funding for rural development and capacity building. So think of it almost as like a rural grants program or grant program specifically for rural counties. So that is like the first time this has ever happened, especially that mandatory piece. That is a huge, huge win. We've never been able to secure mandatory funding for that rural development title.
What was the second piece? You said
the
capacity building?
500, what?
You said capacity building?
Yeah, capacity building. So it's kind of like economic development, workforce development. It's going to be like it's a very flexible pot of money.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Another huge highlight also is it fully extends the Good Neighbor Authority eligibility to counties. So what this means is that counties would be able to conduct Good Neighbor Authority land management projects on non-federal lands and then also retain those funds. And then the final piece of this too, again, in the Senate framework, is that it continues support for food stamps. So the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Under the House framework, again, kind of a little bit more of a mixed bag for counties. It does reallocate a little over $14 billion in Inflation Reduction Act funds under the Farm Bill conservation title. So it would be taking money away from the IRA and putting it into those conservation programs under the conservation title. So taking away that money. There are also tighter restrictions and kind of weaning folks off of the federal food stamps program, SNAP, as well too. For the first 5 years, there would be no difference, but over a 10-year period, there would be a $30 billion reduction in SNAP benefits under the House proposal. So obviously that's a huge concern to counties. And the reason for that reduction is that it would be a pay for other like farm subsidy programs within the Farm Bill. And then, but a huge, there are also some good things in there, rural broadband, rural workforce, so funding for both of those pieces. And then I think the biggest item for us is that the House version would reauthorize Secure Rural Schools, the SRS program, which Florida does have, obviously some federal land, typically more of like a Western state priority, but we have been advocating for the reauthorization of SRS for some months now. So that was a big win in that House package. So that's all to say right now, everything's up in the air. Now that these frameworks are out, we need to get the legislative texts. On NACo's end, what we're going to do is that we are going to do an analysis of both of those packages. It's going to be like a side-by-side analysis and how it corresponds with NACo's policy that we have. So you'll hear a lot more information from us over the next couple of weeks. But again, both packages have some good things for counties. I think the main sticking points here is obviously going to be around the nutrition title. So SNAP, that's going to be the primary piece too. So that's the updates on Farm Bill. And then I can move on to the last item, which is on artificial intelligence. So you all may have seen that earlier this week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, along with his artificial intelligence working group, which he set up a number of months ago at this point. But what they did is actually they unveiled a proposal for the federal government to invest at least $32 billion annually on non-defense related AI systems. These levels of spending, they were actually first proposed by an independent commission. It's called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Pretty much what would be included in this $32 billion is that it would be an investment in an array of items. It's around like healthcare, technology, and so on. So it's kind of almost like what's happening is that it's going to be like a campaign pretty much for the investment in AI, just to make sure that the United States is on par with other nations, with everything that AI is happening. So definitely you'll get more information around that as they outline exactly what sort of pillars are going to be included in, what is that $32 billion exactly going towards? So we'll definitely provide probably some sort of analysis on that AI package and what that would potentially look like. And of course, as always, the impacts on counties too. But just so you know, that was a pretty big announcement for the majority leader as well. But happy to answer any questions, AI, Farm Bill, anything that I mentioned before too.
I don't know what the Senate leader had talked about in the policy framework, but I mean, a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the news clips is the concern about AI and campaign security.
Yeah.
And false fake ads, and some of that
Yeah.
stuff is it's kind of scary because
Yeah.
is there a focus on that as well, or do they address it?
Yeah. So within the $32 billion, within like the priorities that were included, it definitely has a huge emphasis on tackling like the deep fakes being used in the elections, as well as another huge part of this is like the non-consensual distribution of like specific images as well too. So that's kind of being coupled together, just because that has become such a huge issue over the last couple of months. I will say too, outside of Schumer's proposal, the Department of Justice, as well as the Election Assistance Commission, EAC for short, they have been working together to also address these issues around deepfakes and how they're being used this election cycle as well too, because there are just such major concerns about AI and elections right now.
What about the AI committee with NACo? I don't know if it's called a working group or an ad hoc committee. And I know they issued some guidelines for counties to look at and to consider, just in terms of doing their own audit for AI in their communities. What's the committee doing over the next 12 months?
Yeah. So actually, in terms of what has been happening with the AI committee, is that they actually most recently met they had a meeting, their last in-person meeting ahead of the annual conference. They just met in Chicago for several days. So they are actually, as Eric, as you mentioned, they're working on releasing their final report of various findings for the annual conference, actually. And so what it is, and I can't unveil it like yet since they're still finalizing it, but it's pretty much going to be separated into various sections that provide best practices to counties, but also it talks about what does it look like when we're talking about the intergovernmental partnership with AI. So it provides recommendations for local, state, and the federal government. And then again, those county best practices too. So it's going to be a lengthy report with a lot of great information. But we will be having that at the annual conference for like the formal unveiling.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Last thing, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you just briefly talk about the Safe Streets program and the funding that is associated with that? Your colleague talked about that in the county countdown.
Oh, yeah, of course. So for the Safe Streets program, I'm trying to remember exactly. This was this past week where the funding was aligned, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So pretty much what the Safe Streets program is. So that is a new grant opportunity that was announced, which ultimately what it is can be used for is that you can address, or you can use the funding to implement new safety interventions on streets that have more kind of like small scale investments. So think about like crosswalks or stop signs and so forth. So that funding opportunity is open right now. How it's typically implemented, or how counties can actually access the funds, is that it is a formula funded grant opportunity as well. So counties are eligible to actually apply for the grant and be able to access that funding. Eric, I'll get back to you on the exact date in terms of when the deadline actually is, so that you can pass that along to your Florida folks. But that grant opportunity is open and ready to be applied for right now. I will say that the Safe Streets has been a huge highlight right now is Infrastructure Week here in Washington, D.C. So we have been at various events all over town, talking about not only the Safe Streets grants, but also how are we going to start brainstorming a new surface transportation reauthorization bill for 2026, which is crazy to think that we're already talking about that. I feel like the infrastructure law was just passed, but we are having those conversations already, both with other state and local associations, but also with the private sector too. I was at a meeting yesterday with all of those different groups talking about the need for direct funding to counties that own and operate bridges, as well as the need to really rethink the permitting process as well. So those are kind of the key items that we're working on and working with our partners ahead of 2026.
Awesome. I said I didn't want to put you on the spot, but you had all this in your head, so thank you. All right, so anything else that we need to know about? Like, what do we have to look forward to over the next couple of months in DC?
Yeah, I think just the final items, I would just say honestly that over the next couple of months, we're really just going to be focusing on the fiscal year 2025 appropriations bills that are coming out. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee, House Appropriations Committee, excuse me, Congressman Cole, he actually just released his estimates for fiscal year 2025. Spoiler alert, there are major cuts to non-defense spending, especially like the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education bill, along with a couple of others. So we're definitely going to be focusing on that and advocating for county priorities. So I would say that's the biggest one. The affordable connectivity obviously is another one that I mentioned earlier. So, just keep an eye out for those items.
All right. Had you on for 30 minutes. I think that's enough. Take a breather. All right. Well, appreciate you doing this, and we will see you at NACo in the summer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.